Right. Well, as most of you, I think most all of you are aware, Star and I were able to go back to Michigan this past week for Christmas, able to spend it with family. Mirabe was able to have her first Christmas with her grandparents and her great-grandparents, and they were so excited by all of that. Well, one of our favorite things, besides family, going back to Michigan, you don't have to cook. We don't have to cook. It's always so much fun to go out to a restaurant to eat because you don't have to cook. You don't have to set the table. Although there was some table setting involved on Christmas, but mostly we didn't have to set the table. There's no dishes to do when you're done. And even if we had to do dishes, my parents have a dishwasher. We don't. So, we're like, that's cheating. So it feels like you're not doing any dishes. There's no leaving the table, everything is just there. It's relaxing and it's comfortable. Sarah and I got to eat dinner last night on the road. So that means we haven't had to cook anything yet. Now when we go home after church and we got to find lunch, that's when it starts. But for the moment, it's enjoyable. By nature, we like to be served, don't we? We like to be pampered. Or rather, we like to not have to serve, even if it's a matter of serving ourselves. For some of us, it's not about the restaurant experience, but that brings us about to us. But maybe it's going to the salon. Maybe it's going to the whatever that might be. I'm trying to think of the word for it, and I lost it. We get a massage and a manicure and all these things. The spa. Thank you. See, I am a fan. I don't know those words. Those aren't in my dictionary. For others, it might be a catering to our entertainment, like going to a hockey game, or, say, having 200 channels sent directly into your living room. These experiences, or these comforts, they bring us pleasure. They make us happy. We place in them some sort of value. These pleasures are what make, for many of us, generosity difficult. Wow, we're talking about generosity after Christmas? Yup, we're talking about generosity after Christmas. Because there is no Christmas season, there is no Christmas spirit, there is just the church. There is just a Christ-like discipleship, right? And that doesn't happen at a certain season or at a certain time of year. So, generosity, the week after Christmas, the week after you realize what your credit card bills are looking like right now after all those gifts. For real generosity to occur, we end up having to sacrifice. And we end up having to lose out on such pleasures and pampering in which we place such value. Maybe we don't get to go out to dinner twice a week. Maybe it's just once a week. Maybe it's just once every other week. We have to cook more than we would like. Generosity is not about how much we give, but rather it's about how much is given up. We talked about a couple weeks back that the amounts don't really matter. Percentages don't really matter. What matters is how much it takes before it starts impacting our lives, before it starts causing us to have to sacrifice and to go without. That's when it starts to matter. That's when giving becomes more than just giving and it becomes generosity. We like to be brought to a state of pleasure, and it can't be denied that the very thing that we have chosen to sacrifice actually has brought us some degree of pleasure. Generosity might just mean we get to do less pleasurable things. We go to work, we earn a paycheck, and we bring sweat and pain into our lives for the purpose of attaining pleasurable things. These things don't actually belong to us, though. But that doesn't mean we don't enjoy them anyway. We all have something, or rather some things, in our lives in which we place a certain amount of value in. They bring us pleasure. Every single one of us. None of us are excluded. For us to trim off the excess, for us to learn contentment, it means that there are things we might do less of, but there are things we might just lose entirely. kind of scares us, doesn't it? The idea that this one thing that I take much pleasure in order for me to be generous means that I might not ever get to do it again. The idea of being content sounds a lot more like being in lack. It sounds like we're being told to learn to live with nothing. We're afraid of having nothing. Afraid of having no pleasure, no comfort. We think something along the lines of, if I learn contentment, I will never be able to, and we each need to fill in that blank again. I think the question of contentment isn't so much about learning to live without, but rather deciding what kind of things have value to us. It's about rather deciding what kind of things we will choose to take pleasure in. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul isn't telling Timothy, remove himself from all the materials of the world. He's not saying, don't take pleasure in going out for dinner tonight. Don't take pleasure in having cable TV. But rather, what he is saying is realize that the materials of this world have no value whatsoever. He's saying, place value in the appropriate things. So we're not even saying, cut back on the things which you see as valuable. What we're saying now is saying, rather, make generosity, make giving, make living a sacrificial life something of value to you. Change the things which you find to be valuable. Paul tells Timothy to realize the value that he has within his relationship with God. He's saying, don't diversify your investments. Don't play it safe. Don't put all your eggs in the same basket. He is saying, place all your eggs in one basket. Seek one thing. Not a little bit of God and a little bit of the world. Learn, rather, that God gives such a high return on your investments that for you to invest in anything other than God would actually be a loss. Recognize the value of that investment. Don't put any value, hope, or pleasure in anything but God. That is what Paul is saying to Timothy. But then comes the crux of the matter. Every single one of us has this seed, deep or maybe not so deep, within us that actually believes that the things of this world have value. Even though we read things in Scripture that say, oh, things of this world don't have value, things that are moth and rust destroy, and we say with our lips, yeah, they have no value, we're storing up treasures in heaven, seek ye first the kingdom of God, right? Okay. But then deep down, we look at our spending habits and we look at the things that we tend to place value in, and we realize that we don't actually believe that. Or maybe deep down we struggle with believing in that. And I think we all struggle. I struggle with that. Okay, it's hard to say that things like cable, internet, being able to not have to cook tonight doesn't have value. Because you know what? Going out to cook, not having to cook tonight sounds pretty valuable to me because I didn't get home until 8:30 last night. And I definitely don't feel like going home and cooking tonight. That sounds pretty valuable. But we're not the only ones that struggle with this. There are definitely, as we look at Scripture, those who we can look to for help and for examples. Think about Solomon, for example. What did Solomon have? Everything. And then a little more of everything, right? He had a little too much of everything. How many wives did he have? 700 wives and 300 concubines. Oh, what a mess. What a mess. You think one relationship is hard? He had absolutely everything he could ever want.
He was bipolar.
And he had a few weaknesses, as we know. And these weaknesses eventually brought him down. But Solomon wrote about these things in the book of Ecclesiastes. And he realized just how pointless they really were. Unfortunately for Solomon, He seemed capable of addressing the problem, but unable to do anything about it. He was able to address with his lips how invaluable the things of this world are, but deep down within his heart told him another story. But that doesn't mean his words don't have value, right? So let's turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. It's going to be up on the board behind me, but Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We'll start in verse 1. And you can probably place yourself in this right now, right? I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched my heart, how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I brought male and female slaves. I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had gone before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the children of men. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and the striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. That's kind of depressing. Ecclesiastes is a very depressing book. If it is not read with the realization that there is one thing that is not chasing after the wind. There is one thing of value in which to partake that is not vanity. I think if we're honest with ourselves as we're reading Ecclesiastes and all this talk of vanity, we find ourselves quietly mumbling, well, of course it's all vanity when you have it all. Sure, Solomon is telling you it's all vanity because Solomon has tried it all. Let me have a chance to try it all, and then we'll see if it's vanity. He's a spoiled king who got bored. If I got to experience some of that, it wouldn't be so vain. I could use a little more vanity in my life. But Solomon wasn't talking about having it all, and he wasn't talking about being bored. He was talking about being fulfilled. Absolutely every experience he had indulged in was fleeting. None of it lasted. The pleasure passes. Nothing is eternal. It might make him feel like he was fulfilled for a moment, but then the moment was gone and he was left empty. He was desperate, reaching and grabbing hold of everything he could find. You can't tell me that you need 700 wives and 300 concubines if you're not feeling empty. Isn't that just screaming out, I need someone. I need to be loved. I need to be wanted. I need to be fulfilled. I need to feel like I have value. But every time, he was left feeling empty. Something had to fulfill him. Something had to give him meaning. But no matter how many wives he found, how much he gained, how much money he gained, how much he drank, how leisurely his life was, he was still left with no purpose, no value, no significance. What in all of this world can possibly fulfill? Solomon says, I found it all, I tried it all, and none of it held on. Every bit gone. Some of us have had experiences like this, and we can echo his sentiments. I think that most all of us would agree in theory that Solomon is right. We can at least agree with our mouths that Solomon is right. It's convincing our hearts that becomes the difficult part, isn't it? Even if we might convince our hearts now, but then when we, get to the store, or when we're, getting ready to fix dinner, we make it a little more difficult. Yet somehow we all seem to struggle with the same exact issue of placing value in something that is lacking it. We all become materialistic to some degree or another. And being materialistic is not simply restricted to physical materials, but it's also pleasures of this world. I don't think our primary problem, though, is our perception of material value. Our problem is not that we place too much value in the things of this world. I think rather our problem is that we place too little value in our God. Because, let's admit it, there is some value, there is some value in some of the things of this world. We all just got done with Christmas, right? You can't tell me, Nancy, right, that on Christmas when you were able to give gifts to your granddaughters, that the smile it brought them and the experience you were able to share with them didn't have value. It did. It definitely had value. There are things that do have value. The problem isn't that we're placing too much value in things. The problem is that we're placing too little value in our God. Because if we realize just how valuable our God was, it doesn't matter how much value we place in the things of this world, because we'd always desire Him first. We have a fear deep within us that we are in fact losing, sacrificing, and giving up things simply to lose some more. We're all going to heaven. We're all gaining the same thing, no matter how much we lose or hold on to. So why bother losing here something that will not create any gain there? We struggle with the idea that we're giving up what is vanity for the sake of more vanity. So why not just hold on to both? It's not the value of our world that comes into question, but the value of our God. I read a quote by A.W. Tozer the other day that brought this all into a better perspective for me. It reads, What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Were we able to extract from any man a complete answer to that question, what comes into your mind when you think about God, we might predict with certainty the spiritual future of that man. Basically, what Tozer is saying is that who we believe God is determines every part of our Christian lives. It determines how we live. Who God is to us determines how attached we are to the things of this earth and how generous we are. Our God has promised us many things. He has said that He would bless us, that He would care for us, that He would provide for us. If we believe this, then we will be more inclined to let go of the things that are truly vanity. But if we believe that all the promises God gave are for another day, eventually I'll go to heaven, eventually everything will be all right, and then He pretty much leaves us hanging out to dry while we're here on this earth, then we're going to end up living like it. And we're going to chase after the vain things of this world. I think it's interesting how the people of the Old Testament responded to God. I think of Joshua, Moses, Jacob, and others. And I think of their reactions to the messengers of God and God himself. The messenger of God, the angel of God shows up, and what do? They're afraid. They never doubted the power or the ability of God. They knew that if God said something, he was more than capable of doing it. I think their doubt was not founded in whether God was capable of doing something. Their doubts came about because they were wondering if they were going to be collateral damage in the process. What's going to happen to me when God does this? Sure, God is going to bring us victory over the Philistines, but am I going to be lost in the process? Think about it. If I were one of the Israelites, say at Jericho, and I believed that God was not only capable of tearing down the walls, but in fact he would tear down the walls, I wouldn't be concerned about whether they were going to fall or not. What would I be concerned about? Are they going to fall on top of me? We have this God who is so great and powerful. He created all the world and all of the universe. So I know that my God is capable to do great things. Our question is not in regards even to his capability, but rather his willingness. With all this big picture stuff, is God willing to step into my little life and put my little loaf of bread on my little table? I know the walls are going to fall down. I know I'm going to be saved in the end. So yes, I'll come to church. Yes, I'll follow after you. But when I come home, are you going to put bread on my table? Are you going to send another paycheck in the mail? Because if I don't believe that, then sure, I can live like it here, but can I live like it at home when the little things come up? In other words, can I live generously in such a way that sacrifices not just my comfort, but maybe my basic sense of needs? Is God too busy waging war in the cosmic battle of good versus evil? But we have to stop and realize that God didn't simply promise to knock down the walls of Jericho, but he promised to give his children good gifts. God has declared himself not just able, but willing. Willing to come through in the big and the small ways. Jesus didn't simply have the power flowing within him so that he could walk on water. But he had the willingness and the ability to pass it on and enable Peter to walk on water as well. So who do we believe that our God is? Is he a great God, but nothing more? Or is he a great God and a loving Father? When we believe that our God is who Scripture describes him as, then we become empowered to stop trying to find value in the vanity of this world. What will our picture of God do for our lives? Do we trust him to provide in the way that he says he will? Do we believe that the treasures of heaven and the blessings of God are not simply another form of vanity? When we allow the true form of a capable and willing God to take form in our minds, it transforms who we are, what we do, and what we're willing to give. Are we a giving people or are we a generous people? When we have a God willing to provide, there is no reason to be afraid. There is no reason to not be generous. When we have the image of a great, fulfilling God, then we are able to stop chasing after the vain things of this world, trying to find something that fulfills. When we see God clearly, we see that it is an absolute foolishness to invest in anything other than him. Knowing who God is enables us to be generous and sacrificial. It frees us from the pleasures of the world and transforms our lives. One thing Sarah and I were talking about on the way back, the church I grew up in, I guess I came to the realization as we were talking on the way back that I actually would rather be here than there. And the reason for that, in this church, it'd probably be considered a healthier church. It's definitely a much bigger church. But something came up, and in that moment when we started talking about it, I realized that's not a one-time thing, it was a pattern. There's a young girl there. She's maybe, 24? And she grew up in the church. I mean, from birth, been in the church. She's living on her own, single, and she has Crohn's. In Michigan, Medicaid works a little differently, and she was not able to get it. And so for the past couple of years, she has been living with Crohn's without medication. She has not treated it at all. And so what that meant was, just a week or two ago, she ended up in the hospital for almost 2 full weeks, 12 days, without insurance, because of an emergency situation that came up because of the Crohn's. And Sarah was really kind of put off by this. Why didn't the church respond? Why didn't the church do something? And it's not because the church is too big, because the church that she went to while she was in Rochester, that I've spent some time with as well, their church probably 3 times the size of that. And they had someone robbed one day. And the next week, in the middle of the service, they said, all right, we're taking a special collection for that family. A 1,000 plus member congregation was able to step up and respond to one person being robbed that night. That wasn't the issue. But this church has been silent. This church that I grew up in. And that's why, as we continue talking about this, all the things that could go wrong here, all the things that may not go right, if that happened in this church, I know what would happen. This church would respond. And that automatically makes it a place that I'd rather be. Don't you think that has something to do with who we imagine and know God to be? This is a God who responds to not just the people who are suffering, but the people in this church on a daily basis. And that enables us to be able to respond to those kind of situations, to be able to give, to be able to say, you know what? I don't need those simple pleasures. Because this has so much more value. For me to skip out on that moment to respond, I would actually be taking something much less than something I could have had. Knowing who God is enables us to be generous and sacrificial. It frees us from the pleasures of the world. It transforms our lives. We are no longer chasing after the wind, hoping to attain an illusion of something that can never be grasped. But we are holding on to an everlasting God who is willing and able to be active in even the smallest parts of our lives. When we see who God truly is, we can be changed. We're not just Christians. We're not just disciples. We don't just give a tithe. We don't just give, but we become a generous, caring, servant-hearted people.